So we are holding on verse 27 and verse 28 actually, and let's begin. So again, we're in chapter 22, verse 28, and I should just mention verse 27, with the pure you act purely, with the corrupt you act perversely. We said that refers to paroi, and with the pure you act purely, we said it had to do with, number one, lifnim mashuras hadin, someone going above and beyond the letter of the law. And so Hashem reciprocates. You go beyond the letter of the law, Hashem also goes beyond your normal judgment and says, no, instead I'm going to judge you much more positively and much more for your benefit. And then the other explanation, which we got a little stuck on yesterday, Ezra was here talking about, he was mentioning that didn't really understand it this way, but one of the commentaries does explain it to mean David was saying that with the pure you act purely, or with the devout you deal devoutly, is actually on that verse, with the devout you deal devoutly, that it referred to David versus Shaul, and David was more devout than, or at least he felt that way, that he was more righteous than, and he was thanking Hashem for letting him have the kingdom over Shaul, even though David sinned and Shaul sinned, and yet David got the kingdom. Not only that, David sinned twice, it says. Shaul only sinned once. At least that's the way that the Talmud mentions this. And still, David seemed to have gotten the kingdom, and not only for himself, but for all his descendants. And Saul lost the kingdom. Now, how does that sound fair? And the answer, at least the simple understanding, was that David had a certain level of righteousness that, and as I mentioned, at least according to some commentaries, it had to do with the fact that he admitted his sin right away, while Saul didn't. There are other interpretations. It just happened to be that David was in the right mazel and so on. He was born at the right time, and but in any event, our verse, if you want to translate it that way, it would be that David was saying that Hashem dealt in a very kind way with him versus Saul. Now, we're in verse 28.
Rabbi,
yes, Ben.
I think that maybe by Saul, it was a direct order, and he didn't carry it out.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little different than David. He was ordered by Shmuel to do something, and he didn't do it.
Right, but then there's also a direct order not to murder. And King David was a little guilty in that sense, in other words, he did have some questionable acts, David. And then the other...
It's part of the reason he was chosen to where he was.
Let me just conclude. Ben, let me just finish my point. Actually, okay. I didn't explain it well. David did a sin that could be considered like murder. Saul could have explanations behind his sin. So he had a direct command, but obviously he was on such a high level that he must have had some type of understanding why what he did was not wrong. Now, David also did another sin, that he counted the Jewish people, which we'll soon see after this chapter. And as well, there also, it's sort of a direct command in the Torah. Well, you could interpret it differently. I understand that David interpreted it that it didn't apply to him. It applied in Saul. You want to say was commanded directly. I hear you, but Saul also had an excuse, at least according to some commentaries. Saul felt that he is going to kill Agag, just not right away. He was going to kill him later, but it's not like he wasn't going to kill him. So it was a direct command. You're not wrong about that, but there's room to say that David also had somewhat of a direct command. The Jewish people, I mean, the whole, we're not allowed to kill. That's a direct, sort of a direct command. And then the not counting the people. Maybe it wasn't directly to him, but it was. There's reason to say that it applied to him. And Saul has his reasons as well why he didn't listen. Again, whether we understand it or not, at least according to some commentaries, it mentions this idea, but the other commentaries just leave it as a question that he must have had a reason. We might not know it. So it's not so simple. Now, I did mention, of course, there are other Talmudic statements. There's two Talmudic statements about this whole thing. One of them is in Tractate Moed Katan, and the other one is in Tractate Yuma. And they both deal with David versus sin versus Saul. And, in Moed Katan, it mentions this very surprising thing. It says this line over there that Hashem told David, you're singing about the destruction. Wait, there's so much noise here. Okay, I think, did everyone get muted? Yeah. A very surprising statement. And again, there obviously are interpretations to this statement, but it does say there that Hashem told David, you're singing a song about the downfall of Saul. In other words, you were saved and Saul lost his kingdom. And that's what you're praising me for that. Hashem told him, David, if not, if you would have been Saul, and Saul would have been David. In other words, actually, I'm not going to translate that. I'll just tell you what it says. If you would have been Saul, and Saul would have been you, I would have destroyed many Davids before you. In other words, implying that Saul was more righteous than you, and I would have gotten rid of many of yous in order to have him, in order to have Saul. Now, which at least one way of learning it is, he was born with certain luck, and you were born with your mazel, your luck, and he might have been deserving of more right. He was more righteous, but he was stuck with his mazel, and you had a better mazel. And if you would have been him, I would have taken Saul, and even if I had many of yous, I would have taken Saul. Ibadati, these are the words. It's a Talmudic statement. It's a Talmud in Moed Katan. Ibadati kama David mipanav. I would have destroyed many Davids before to have Saul, which is surprising to us, but that's the way Saul was very righteous. It sounds surprising. And then there's statements in Tractate Yuma that talk about the fact that that Saul sinned once and David sinned twice, and it talks about David's two sins: Uriah, killing Uriah, causing Uriah to die, basically, and counting the Jewish people. And of course, the Talmud talks about Saul's sin, that not killing Agag. But then the Gemara asks other questions, but Saul also killed Noiv, and David also had other sins, Bathsheba, and so it does talk about the different sins there, but it does compare the two, and so on in these two Talmudic statements. The main point that I want to bring out from that is that we're dealing with two very righteous people, even though from the wording in the book of Samuel, I think it gives more an impression that David was more righteous than Saul. But from the Talmud, it seems like Saul was very righteous. One of those Talmudic statements mentions that Saul was pure with no sin at all when he was appointed to be king. He had zero sin. So definitely is these are very high level people. Yes, Ben.
I wanted to say I'm not a judge of righteousness, but on Saul, we don't have any information before he met Shmuel.
Yeah, very little, right?
So
right.
With David, to me, David, when he killed Goliath, to me, he was it. I said, he's the man.
Right. But the thing is that there is a concept there mentioned there that in Saul's generation, most of the people were wicked. And Saul, because he was so righteous, he gets like an extra, it's like there's some element of extra credit there because he, compared to his generation, he was not affected at all. He was able to stay in his level of righteousness. So there is such a concept there as well.
It's the concept of Noah.
Similar to Noah, except that Noah, there's a negative element to it, that he didn't help out his generation, and that what would have been had he been in a more righteous generation.
Right.
So you have two negative elements with Noah. With Saul, we don't find that. He wasn't in a bad generation. He stayed righteous, and he would have probably been the same righteous had he been in a righteous generation as well. So you have these very positive things about Saul. Okay, getting back to we really limited with time. So going back to we're verse Rabbi, 28. Yes, Moshe.
I just want to mention there could actually be a juxtaposition between what happened with King Ahasuerus and Haman, wazir, an evil wazir, and Doeg and Shaul, because Doeg was a bad advisor to Shaul, and he became mad because he had an advisor like this, somebody who was on a high enough madrega to be equivalent to a Torah scholar, and yet he affected his mindset to such a degree where this may have been, his purity may have been affected by that, not by his own inclination, but by the inclination, but by the influence of an evil wazir. You understand what I'm saying? There's also a very similar situation that took place with Haman and Ahasuerus, King Ahasuerus. He was advised by a very evil person, and he found out otherwise. So
right. The only thing is you're comparing it to the story of Noiv, which the Gemara is not even dealing with. The Gemara is talking about Agag, the other story with Agag, which it seemingly was Shaul's idea in the first place. He did consult, but it was his idea. And then there's also an issue that with what you're saying, that the Talmud implies that Achashverosh might have hated the Jews more than Haman. There is I have to look it up exactly what maybe Mordechai remembers. Does it about Haman hating the Jewish people and Achashverosh? Do you remember there is a statement there that I believe in the Talmud that implies like Achashverosh also hated the Jewish. It wasn't just Haman who hated the Jewish people, but I'd have to look it up exactly. Anyway, the bottom line is we're not dealing with the issue of Noiv, which is what you're comparing it to. We're really dealing with Agag, the story of killing out Amalek. Okay, so coming back to here, we're in chapter 22. We just mentioned verse 28. You save the humble people while your eyes are upon the haughty to lower them, and that connects with a Talmudic statement in Erchin, where it mentions over there that God doesn't live amongst the haughty. In other words, if someone is haughty, it says, Ein ani v'hu yechelam lader. I and he cannot live in the same place. That Hashem sort of humiliates the haughty to lower them. And verse 20, and you save the humble people. There is also a concept here of Vesam ani toishia ve'einecha al ramim tashbil, that Hashem's we are called. I'm sorry. We are called a nation that's am ani, a poor nation. We are called a humble nation. That the Jewish people have an element of humility. And verse 29, you are my lamp, Hashem. Hashem illuminates my darkness. Now, of course, on a simple level, you are my lamp means you save me, and you illuminate my darkness. Darkness is referring to times of challenge. So you are my lamp. You are sort of the salvation. Another meaning of this is you are my lamp refers to Torah. Torah or says the Torah is light. Or is light. So that you are my lamp, and you illuminate my darkness, which could also mean the areas of Torah that I am unclear about, that I don't understand. You illuminate my darkness. Now, the other meaning of this is that it's referring to certain wars that King David had. King David had wars with Amalek at night, and Hashem miraculously either sent shooting stars so that they could see things, or that he made the sun stay still so that they would have light and be able to fight and win the enemy. Now, the verse continues. So these are all interpretations of you are my lamp, and Hashem illuminates the darkness. Now we're in verse 30. And in verse 30, the verse says, for with you I smash a troop, and with my God I leap over a wall. And well, it could also mean, there's two translations here. Rutz could mean rotzatz, which means smash. It could also mean to chase. So I either chase the enemy or I smash the enemy. And with my God I leap over a wall. That's the understanding is that's referring to conquering Jerusalem, which King David had to leap over a wall. Of course, on a simple level, it just means that I could conquer walled cities, or I could accomplish things that seemed impossible. But it's there is an understanding here that it's referring to conquering Jerusalem. And when it was called Yevus, it was the city. It was the city of Yevus that Yoav Yoav was able to bend over a certain tree and be able to fly over. And David HaMelech, it says that the wall was made miraculously lower, that David was able to leap over it. Verse 31 says, the God, his way is perfect, and the promise of Hashem is pure. Mogenhu, he is a shield for all who take refuge in him. Now, when it says the promise, it says God's way is perfect. Of course, that's obvious to us. The promise of Hashem is pure could mean, one of the translations is that when Hashem says anything, everything comes true, every single thing. There's nothing in his words that don't come exactly true. And the promise of Hashem is pure. Another translation is that his judgment is perfect. So either nothing in his words are going in vain, and or his judgment is perfect. And then it says he is a shield for all who take refuge in him, which seems to have the meaning that by you trusting in Hashem, you draw down miracles. In the merit of your faith, you draw down, Hashem becomes a shield. Hashem is a shield for you. for all who take refuge in it. By you having emunah, Hashem, you sort of awaken that element of Hashem being a shield for you. So that is at least one way of learning it. There is another concept over here. Imras Hashem Tzrufa refers to Torah, that it's not the promise of Hashem, but it's the word of Hashem is like is refined, or it refines. It refines a person's mind by studying Torah. It refines our minds to become more pure. And of course, there is a alternative understanding is that you need to have a pure mind to be able to study Torah. So we're now in verse 32. Verse 32. For who is God besides Hashem, and who is a rock besides our God? And of course, that means that Hashem has the greatest power, and no one can stop Hashem from anything. Verse 33, the God, my fortress of strength, he cleared my way with perfection. And what does it mean he cleared my way? So one of the interpretations here is that it's referring to when Saul threw the arrow, the spear, he threw the spear at David when he was playing the harp, and David miraculously moved away. So Hashem was cleared my way with perfection. Another interpretation here is that it's referring to that if you remember the story of Abigail, when David wanted to kill Naval for not providing him with his needs, with sustenance. Naval was a very wealthy person, and he was refusing to help David, even though David had helped him tremendously. And so it says that Abigail came running, and she told David, "You're not allowed to kill Naval, even though you were anointed, but you're not officially a king yet, and he's not considered a moirid b'malchus. He's not considered a rebellious against the king because you're not officially king, and therefore you really shouldn't kill him." And she saved David from sinning. So that's what it means. He cleared my way, that he saved me from sinning. He cleared my way with perfection. And now we're in verse 34. And verse 34 says, he makes my feet swift like deer, like hinds, and stood me upon my heights. And that's referring to the fact that he was able to run away from his enemies, or he was able to chase his enemies with that great haste, with tremendous strength. And verse 35 is he trained my hands for battle so that a copper bow could be bent in my arms. Now, there are two ways of translating this. One way is that it's the bow is normally made out of wood that could be bent, so you could pull the arrow back and it shoots forward. And the thing is, if you have a bow made out of copper, doesn't really it's not so easy to pull it backwards in order to shoot the arrow, because the bow the copper is so solid. The fact is that David was so strong, he was able to do that. So a copper bow could be bent by my arms, meaning he was able to use use copper as his bow and arrow. His bow could have been copper, and he was able, and it would actually shoot forth much faster, but it was much harder to do. Now there is a medrash over here. Rashi brings a medrash here that says that David HaMelech would have these copper bows when people would come to visit him, other dignitaries, and they would see it. They would say, he's just trying to scare us. And so David would show his strength when they were there, and he would shoot a few arrows with his copper bow. Now, the other translation over here means that wasn't that he would bend the copper bow. It means he would break the enemies, or the enemy's copper, the enemy's metal. He was able to break it, break all their, break. He was able to destroy their ammunition. The next verse mentions that, or break, I should say, break their armaments. Okay, the next verse, 36, you have given me the shield of your salvation. Your humility made me great. And one of the understandings is you have given me the ability to be humble. In other words, David was even with his greatness, he was able to absorb. He was able to feel humble, which is not so easy with someone with such power. And he thanked Hashem for that ability to be humble, to acknowledge that all of his strength came from Hashem. All of everything he had came from Hashem's gift to him. And now, verse 37. Verse 37 is, you widen my stride beneath me, my ankles have not faltered. And one of the understandings of you widened my stride beneath me refers to the miracle that we just read about. Yishbi Benoiv tried to do the wine press and crush David HaMelech. And in the end, David HaMelech was miraculously saved under with the earth under him he was able to move around, and he was able to be saved and not be crushed. So you have widened my stride beneath me, and my ankles have not faltered, and that has to do with the fact that David didn't fall. He you allowed me to walk with wide steps that I shouldn't fall. When you walk with short steps, it's easier to fall. And so you have widened my stride beneath me means I haven't fallen. My ankles have not faltered, which means that he went with strength. Verse 38, I pursued my foes. Verse 38 is, I pursued my foes and eradicated them and returned not until they were destroyed. Now this refers to the fact that David HaMelech, when he had his wars, he didn't lose any wars. He won every single war, even though he didn't necessarily eradicate all of the enemies, but the power of the enemy was destroyed. And that's what it refers to here, that I returned not until the enemies were destroyed, not meaning that they were totally annihilated, but they were destroyed to the extent that he was able to, that David was able, that the Jewish people were able to live with peace without the enemy being causing fear. Yes, Mordechai.
Yeah, verse 37 about widening my strides. Isn't there something in the Gemara about that if one takes large steps, it's bad for his eyesight? So
There is. That's why the commentaries here say that it refers to these two things. One was that it's referring to that miracle of Yishbi Benoiv, that he wasn't crushed by the olive press, and the other interpretation here is that when you walk with your feet close together, it's easier to fall. If you have a little space, you more balance. So that's what it means that he was balanced. In other words, it doesn't mean that he took these wide steps that he lost his eyesight. Right. But interesting connection, Mordechai. Thank you. Let me just finish up over here because Rabbi Wernick is already here. Oh boy, we're not even going to finish. Let me just mention this medrash and then I'll conclude. It says, I pursued my foes and eradicated them, return not until they were destroyed. So there is a medrash that interestingly mentions these two psukim. The verse 38 and 39. 39 is, I destroyed them and struck them down so that they did not rise and they fell beneath my feet. So it mentions over there in the Medrash, it compares 4 of the kings of the kingdom of Judah. And it mentions David, Asa, Yehoshaphat, and it mentions a 4th king, Chizkiah. And it mentions all 4 of them. And it says that they each had different ways of fighting the enemy. And it mentions David would fight them until they were totally destroyed. But the other kings, each one did a little less, to the extent that Chizkiah didn't even fight the war. He went to sleep. He just went to sleep. And the Medrash, it's a Medrash, a very interesting Medrash. It says that it's a Psichta Rabasi. What is the meaning of that? That Chizkiah didn't fight at all. He just he went to sleep there. He went to sleep. He was confident Hashem would help. So what does that mean? That David didn't have the confidence that Chizkiah had, that David fought it. So the commentaries explain that all the other kings were not in the level of David, that if they won the war, they would have felt arrogant. So because of that, Hashem made it clearly a miracle. And therefore, they wouldn't have been able to be arrogant. David was on such a high level that even though he won the war physically, he didn't go to his head. It didn't affect him, and therefore he was able to fight the wars and win them, and nevertheless stay humble. Okay, we're up to verse 40, and hand over the mic to Rabbi Wernick.